Good evening. It's good to be here and to see everybody. We're going to look at some questions and answers. Did that PowerPoint ever show up, Joshua? It did, okay. Still getting used to I have a new clicker fancy thing here, but I still find myself looking. I'm sitting here holding it, and I'm like, where's the clicker? It's in my hand. But I want to look at some questions and answers. It technically is March, but it's only been a couple of weeks since our last one. I told somebody that was probably going to be my plan for this Sunday night, just because I've gotten a little bit behind. Not terribly behind, but I just wanted to catch up a little bit, even if it's just by 2 or 3 or whatever. So that said, let's look at some questions and answers. First question is, it's dealing with how do you explain, as the question asks, how do you explain, I shortened it just a little bit to make it fit better because I was running out of space on my slide, but I think it says, how do you explain to a friend that God is real and does not make bad things happen if they, talking about the friend, are between atheism and God. And it says, are there verses, facts, science, I guess, that you would recommend or include in that discussion? This question could really be its own sermon, series of sermons, but just let me say this by way of really, really broad answer, summary. 2 great, excellent resources are Apologetics Press and Christian Courier. apologeticspress.org, apologeticspress.org, and christiancourier.com, I think. Yeah, .com. Those are 2 excellent resources. Wayne Jackson started the Christian Courier. I don't know, it's been probably the 80s, might have even gone back to the 70s. He had originally worked with Bert Thompson in founding Apologetics Press. Wayne ended up moving out to California, so he wanted to keep doing work in the field of apologetics, and so he did that in the form of the Christian Courier. That work just grew and grew, and Wayne, of course, passed away, I believe it was either late 20 or 21. I want to say it was 20, right? And he left this life, but his boys are carrying on that work, Jason and Jared, and they continue working with the Christian Courier website. They continue to publish the Christian Courier. Of course, our congregation receives the subscription to that. And they also have the Fortify Your Faith. It's like an electronic type thing. And so they're doing a lot of great work. But Jason told me one of the last times we were able to sit down and talk when he was here in Bremen, he said something, I think he said hundreds or maybe even, I don't know if he said over 1,000, but it may very well be. I can't remember exactly, but I know he said at least hundreds of articles that his dad wrote that they still haven't gotten to put on the website. You know, he just, as they go through his stuff, I mean, just such a prolific writer, and his bread and butter was apologetics. He wrote on all kind of subjects. A lot of times if I go to take on a subject, maybe it's a sermon, maybe it might just be an article, whatever, and I think, well, I'm not sure exactly how to approach that, or I don't know if I've ever preached on that, taught on that, wrote on that before. It's one of the first places I'll go a lot of times is Christian Courier and see if there's an article there. And they have articles on so many different things, but especially apologetics, defending the faith. Apologetics Press, of course, began same mission. Apologetics Press, they're kind of, it's almost like a mission statement, but almost like a subtext on most of the stuff that they put out is dedicated to the defense of New Testament Christianity. That is primarily in the form of defending the existence of God and the evidence, exposing the evidence that God does exist, that the Bible is His Word, that Jesus is the Son of God, that He's God in the flesh, and defending the text of the Bible, and so on. It's another excellent resource that I use regularly. Can't recommend those two highly enough. Listen, there are lots of others out there by brethren that are just top-notch. Those are just two that came to my mind immediately that I want to mention because we're affiliated with both of those in the form of partnering with them via financial support, but those are certainly not meant to be, it's not to say that they're the only ones. Lots of great resources. Now, some other considerations. Again, condensing this down because there's so much that we could say. I would encourage somebody, if I'm talking to somebody, and I've said this many times too, whether here or other places, if somebody asks me about, well, how would you talk to somebody who maybe they're kind of between atheism and belief, and I'm just not sure, but I want to try to steer them toward belief in God because obviously I believe that's the right thing. One of the things that I try to encourage somebody in that situation, or if I talk to somebody who themselves, well, this person himself or herself is between atheism and belief, I say don't just blindly take someone else's word when it comes to the God of the Bible. It's amazing sometimes people will say, well, I know there may be a God, but it's not the God of the Bible. I've heard people say that before. Why do you say that? Well, because there's no way that's, the God of creation being God and good would do such and such, and talk about what God supposedly did or commands, and many times don't realize what they're talking about. Or sometimes they've taken something that it perhaps is a true statement, but they've isolated it from context. No context of who's being dealt with there. And again, a lot more we can say about that, but just suffice it to say, people sometimes will just take what they've heard without ever bothering to open up the book and say, well, what does the Bible say? What is the context of that statement? We live in such a soundbite society, and some of these television networks, radio stations, they love to give just a little bitty snippet of a much larger conversation. And you can do that and make it sound like somebody says something completely different. Some years ago when I worked at the Gospel Broadcasting Network, sometimes the guys would just be having fun and they would take statements of one of the guys that was on camera and switch those around. And you could switch those around in such a way that it'd make him sound like he was just really being a jerk to someone, or he was saying something that was completely not true, or something that he would completely never say otherwise. Sometimes they'd take little snippets when it's in between takes, and guys are just sort of chatting. And one day Jim Dearman we were goofing off. It was between takes. He had gotten a phone call or something right as we were about to record, and he said, hold on one second, guys, I got to take this. So they said, well, just leave tape rolling. Shouldn't be but just a second. And he's on the phone, and he gets off, and I think he asked, might have been Janice, his wife. He kind of, she was in the other room. Did you do such and such? That was this person calling, asked about that. Oh, no, I forgot. And he was sort of laughing. He says, you're fired. Oh, man, they had a field day with that one. They had all kind of different things somebody would do, and then it'd cut to Jim going, you're fired. But you get the idea. People can take stuff out of context. Don't just blindly believe what somebody says. Hey, that's true if you are a believer. Don't just believe what somebody says. Don't just blindly believe what somebody says about the Bible, what it means to be a Christian, how to become a Christian, how to worship God, how to serve God acceptably. Sometimes we say, well, I'm a believer in God. Well, am I? Or am I just taking what somebody says for it blindly? And so we always want to encourage everyone, be a student of that. Whether you're talking about the Bible or anything else, don't just take somebody's word for it without checking into it. Sometimes people do that when it comes to unbelief. Another thing I would just point out in this discussion is to realize that in Hebrew culture, Hebrew literature, it was common to attribute to God that which He allowed to happen. In other words, God may not miraculously intervene, and so in some sense, nothing can happen without God allowing it. But sometimes they would say things that God did, but what the idea there is, he allowed that. And man, sometimes people run wild with that those statements in Scripture, those who are bent toward unbelief or skepticism without realizing the context. And then another thing I would say is to realize that we live in a fallen world. Sin has entered this world, and from the time sin entered the world, it's never been the same. It never will be the same. But it's not home. Our conversation, our citizenship, literally, Philippians 3:20, is in heaven. This world, as we often sing, is not my home. I'm just passing through. God's never intended this world to be home, but especially since sin entered the world, we have weather events and all kind of other things. Sometimes it's just somebody making a bad choice. And we sometimes say, oh, how could God allow this innocent person to suffer? And sometimes maybe it's a drunk driver, or sometimes it involves drugs or some kind of sinful choice that someone has made and somebody else suffers for it. And somebody say, well, how could God do that? How could there be a God if that's happening? Well, because love allows freedom of choice. And sometimes we benefit from others' freedom of choice, and we're all about that. But freedom of choice, it works both ways. And sometimes, we do suffer because of somebody else's choice. Of course, sometimes we suffer because of our own choices. A lot of different reasons why people suffer, but we live in a fallen world. Sin has marred this world. But ample evidence is available for honest seekers to learn and to know. And I always say, I will sit down and study and consider the evidence with anyone, as long as they will do so with an open mind. And that's always my promise when I'm talking, whether it's somebody who's kind of struggling with unbelief, or whether that's somebody who believes in the Bible, but maybe they say, well, I don't agree with your teaching there, Chad. Let's sit down and talk about that. Well, my promise always is I'm going to sit down with an open mind, and I'm going to consider, because I'm human, I could be wrong. I'm going to sit down and consider that. And it would be, just from common courtesy, I expect that from anybody that I'm going to sit down with. Sometimes you sit down with somebody and the mind is closed, and that becomes a difficulty. You can't really get anywhere if you're dealing with somebody they just shut their mind. They say, well, I got my mind made up, do your best. But in fact, it was just a few years ago right here in Bremen, met a gentleman. Said he didn't believe in God. The more I talked to him, I think he does believe in God. He was just seriously angry with God. But I told him, I said, can we just sit down and have a conversation? I'll talk to anybody. But you're not going to change my mind. Well, could we talk about it? Would you consider it if we talked about it and sat down and maybe just look at some? Yeah, I'd love to talk to you anytime. But I'm not going to change. I know God doesn't exist. You're wasting your time if you think you're going to change on that. What do you do? It's difficult if somebody's got their mind closed. Nearly impossible unless and until they're going to open their mind up some. And so approach the honest seeker differently than those who are very obviously determined not to believe. I'm not saying just, throw your hand up and say, I'm wasting my time with you. But sometimes we can spend so much time dealing with somebody that's got a closed mind, and they're just not open. Whereas sometimes the opposite is true. We may get frustrated. There may be somebody who's an honest seeker, and they're just struggling to grasp or struggling to maybe connect the dots, whatever, but they're wrestling with it with an open mind. And we might be too quick to say, I've shown him, he's not listening, so whatever, shake the dust off my feet. Well, I hope that I would be patient to the nth degree with someone who is struggling and they got an open mind, but they're considering, they're weighing the evidence, versus somebody whose mind's just closed. All right, another question about the devil coming in human form. Can the devil come in human form? And then just added note here, I really feel he can, because there's so much evil and disagreement that some get really furious and ugly toward others, break up friends and family that really care about each other. I've heard, we're talking about the expression, the devil got into them my whole life. Short answer is no, the devil cannot do that. If the devil could do that, this person, whoever was possessed or indwelled by the devil, they would have no choice in what they do. They would have no control over their actions. And you see that with all the examples of demon possession we read about there in the New Testament. No control. But the Bible's pretty clear on this. We're all responsible for our own actions. We all have free will to choose to do right or wrong, which we talked about that this morning. And sometimes people will say the idea of hell, the concept of hell, the teaching, the Bible teaching on hell is, it's unjust or it's unfair. God gives us a choice. And he says if you choose life and you obey him, he will honor that choice, and he's faithful, he's just to reward us with eternal life. But if I choose I'm not going to obey him, or as a Christian I'm going to just turn and walk away, he will honor that choice as well. But the Bible is clear on this. We are responsible for our actions. We're free moral agents, we sometimes say. And the sad reality is, yes, humans are capable of and do some pretty awful and rotten, sometimes downright despicable things. But, and you may be sitting there thinking, it's also true. Humans are capable of and do some pretty amazing, wonderful, benevolent, Christ-like things as well. The expression that's referenced here is just that. It's an expression. It's a figure of speech. It's not that the devil literally gets into someone. But it is a good question, because sometimes maybe somebody acts in such a way that we say, boy, it's almost like they're possessed by the devil. Well, sad reality is they're making choices. Now the good news is we can repent of those choices. We can come to God on his terms and obey him and have hope, have life. But it's not, however bad someone is acting, however wickedly they're behaving, it's not because they're being possessed by the devil. It's because they're making bad choices. But a good question. And then I want to come back to this because it kind of ties in with a couple of different things. But the question that I had, what was this, 2 weeks ago, we really dealt with one question that had about 4 different questions within the one submission. But the one on discouragement, I told somebody, I was thinking about this, I don't know that I've ever had more feedback on a particular question from a Q&A in nearly getting toward 13 years of doing this here at Bremen. It was just, it's something we all deal with. Galatians 6:9 says, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. But let's be honest, sometimes, I don't care who you are going to battle discouragement. And no one is immune to that. Preachers can get discouraged. Elders can get discouraged. Deacons, Bible class teachers, mamas, daddies, grandmamas, granddaddies. We could just keep going. Young people can get discouraged. Old folks can get discouraged. Those in the middle, they could get discouraged. There's nobody that's immune from it. And so I don't have any doubt in my mind that that's why there was so much feedback on this. Some folks were saying, one even was like, I can't remember for sure. That actually might have been me. I don't know who submitted that. Was it me? I said, well, I didn't have a name particularly on that. I did find out who submitted it, but we all battle that. And so I was thinking about this, and part of the reason I was thinking about it was because of yesterday. The part of the question I'm specifically considering here was the one, I think it was the fourth part of the submission. How can a Christian avoid being discouraged or distracted? And I wanted to use that as kind of to come back to that, because again, so much feedback, people that were saying, hey, that was helpful. Some even maybe saying, I'm battling some discouragement. I'm battling It may be in the form of distraction, but a lot of feedback on that, but also because it tied in with some very great reminders that we heard yesterday. There's several of us men that went down to Lake City, Florida for the 21st Standing in the Gap Men's Day. And I have said numerous times before, those lessons are always top notch, and this year was no exception. But if you've never gone before, man, if you get a chance, if you're able, man, it's great just for the fellowship. But boy, this year's theme was brotherhood. And if you weren't able to go and you want to watch, listen, it was a men's day, obviously, but there's stuff in there that young, old, male, female, everybody can take, because there's some really great lessons. I don't know the website off the top of my head, but you can go to the Lake City, you can just search Lake City, Florida Church of Christ. You can go to their website and get access to their YouTube channel that way. You could probably go to YouTube and just search for Lake City Church of Christ or something like that. But they live streamed all those lessons, as I understand, and they are archived as we do here at Bremen. They've got those archived on their YouTube channel. Man, there were some great lessons yesterday, and I couldn't help thinking as I'm sitting there listening to these lessons that I was very much encouraged. The theme was brotherhood. And so here are the lessons that we listened to, and I'm not going to just rehash all the lessons, but just to maybe whet your appetite, especially if you weren't able to hear those. Josh Cantrell, who's going to be with us in just a few days, I'd never even heard Josh preach until I think it was this past year or maybe last year's summer series, and he did a fine job then. But yesterday he just took it up. He took it to the next level and did some excellent preaching on we are a team. And a lot of good stuff in that lesson, but there was one thing that just stuck out in my mind, and it's funny sometimes how you listen to a lesson and you may benefit from it, but sometimes we're forgetful and we have a hard time. Maybe I can't remember the points or something, but Alan Webster told us that. In fact, it was one of our men's days. Might have been just our second ever men's day that we had here at Bremen. He encouraged us, when you're listening to a lesson, look for, if you don't get anything else, if you can't hang on to anything else, find something, find a little tidbit or something. If it's just a single thing you hold on to from that lesson. And that stuck with me from that lesson. But in Josh's message, he talked about being a team in the church. We're a team, we're working together in evangelism and battling the devil, recognizing the enemy. But he talked about one of his basketball coaches when he was a kid. And he talked about some folks would never do that great at basketball, not because they lacked ability. He said maybe not going to go very far in life as far as to their potential. He said the problem is ego, pride. But what stuck with me the most from that was that coach said ego, and one of the guys on the team wanted to know, well, what is ego? And he kind of explained it, but he said, think of it this way. And I sort of laughed to myself because I was thinking about Brother Jimmy Elder, and he talks about sin. Y'all remember Jimmy's acronym, SIN? I'd never heard this before. Jimmy preached here one time. Chris said he remembered it. Self-inflicted nonsense. And that just stuck with me from Brother Jimmy's lesson. But Josh said his coach explained what ego is, but then he said, think of it this way. Ego is edging God out. What a great definition of pride. When we just edge God out of our lives and it becomes about self. But he talked about being a team. Barry Grider had an excellent lesson on mentoring. Man, this was tremendous. And, you know, it reminded me so much of some of the mentors I've been blessed with throughout the years. One of those being Barry. He was the associate minister at Forest Hill. Well, it was not Arnold's at that time when I went to preaching school back in 1996. And he mentored me. It was very encouraging to me. But he talks about a mentor is a teacher, a counselor, and a friend. And a lot of times there's that progression. It goes from teacher, and a mentor, a lot of times somebody, they're teaching you something. They're mentoring you to help you learn, pick up something. But they're also a counselor. They're there to give you counsel. Who among us hasn't picked up the phone, Maybe send a text message to a trusted mentor. Maybe you're facing a difficulty. Hey, can I get your input on this? Can I get some advice, some guidance here, counsel? But there comes a point where they become, and it's not to say that they're not before, but it's almost like peers. Friend. Teacher, counselor, friend. In fact, he used an example of his, this lady when he was just a young man in, I think, high school. And she was very, very encouraging to him. She was a teacher. She taught him. She was also his guidance counselor. And he talked about being able to see her not terribly long before she left this life. And they sat down, and he said, but on that occasion, she's talking to me, and it's like we're equals. We're talking like old friends. And she was still a mentor, but that special friendship. And you think about a way to be Christ-like is to be a mentor. Because John chapter 3, verse 2, Nicodemus comes to Jesus. And what does he say? Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God. Nobody could do these miracles that you do except God be with him. Jesus is a counselor. In fact, he is the wonderful counselor. Isaiah 9:6, as the prophecy stated he would be. And in John 15, verse 15, Jesus says to his apostles, I don't call you servants any longer. I call you friends. So a mentor rather, is a teacher, counselor, and friend. Seek somebody that you can mentor and help them in a good way toward heaven, but also surround yourself with as many good, godly mentors as you can. And I sat there in Barry's lesson, and I just, thinking about the blessings in my life of so many mentors. And even some that have gone on, many have gone on from this life, many that are still around, some even right here within this congregation. And it's a special thing. And you don't know what you do for somebody by being a teacher, a counselor, and a friend, a mentor. You just don't know the difference that makes in somebody's life. It's really hard to put that into words. And I was thinking about it. One of my all-time favorites, a great mentor, and I looked just earlier today. I was trying to remember. I think it was from 21. I have a voicemail that I've saved. Yeah, June the 20th. And it's Brother Roger. And he says, just wanted to call and tell you, you did a good job today. And I'll save that till the day I die. Because it meant so much to me. And it means so much to me. Man, we need godly mentors. We need them ourselves, and we need more people to be mentors, encouragers, because, again, everybody gets discouraged. There's nobody who's immune to that. And so what a tremendous lesson Barry had on that. Victor had another just absolutely wonderful lesson dealing with conflict resolution. Again, the theme of brotherhood, being mentors to others, and finding godly mentors in the brotherhood, being a team as a brotherhood, but also realizing that as a brotherhood, we're made up of people, and people are different, and so there will always be conflict. And how to resolve that. Again, it was just an excellent lesson. Josh Cantrell had a lesson, I think this was right before lunch, on 2x2 evangelism. And this was just kind of looking at the idea of brotherhood going, hand in hand together, taking the gospel out to the world. Not just trying to do that any particular individual trying to do that on their own, but going together as a brotherhood to take the gospel to the world, and realizing that you and I, we're not the enemy. Sometimes we get to we have a problem with friendly fire, but it's realizing the devil, he is the enemy. He seeks to divide, and when we get divided, we're not going to be evangelizing. And then Victor, another great lesson on holding one another accountable. This was our first lesson after lunch. And then Barry Grider closed us out with Christ, our elder brother. And again, sometimes you hang on to one thing in particular from a lesson. I remember Barry mentioning something about, it's a familiar illustration. We've all seen it before. Maybe it's happened to you, where you get somebody who's being picked on, but they got an older brother. And one day the older brother says, you know what, I'm going to go with you. And maybe the older brother kind of hangs back and he's waiting to see what happens, and here come those boys and they start to pick on his little brother. And he gives it just a little bit, and then he steps up and says, hey, what's going on here? Maybe then all of a sudden they're, oh no, we're just having a little fun. It doesn't look like it's fun to him. And maybe he just gives them a tongue lashing and says, hey, you better leave him alone. You mess with him again, you're gonna be dealing with me. And those fellas in that situation are kind of like, oh, okay, hey, you ain't gonna have any trouble out of us. he laughed and said, they may even say, hey, we'll make sure nobody else messes with him, okay? But you and I, we have an older brother, and he's going to look out for us. In fact, he intercedes for us before members of the body of Christ, children of God. He intercedes for us before the throne of God. If you're a Christian, God is your father. You're part of the family of God. And you have an older brother who looks out for you. But if you're a Christian, it also means you're a brother, sister of the other members of the body of Christ. Great, great, great lessons there in Lake City. I'll mention this also because I did want to say this. If I can get over there. In the book of Nehemiah, if you're dealing with discouragement, frustration, even just leadership in general, you want a leadership study, but it may be that you deal with discouragement. There's some great material in Nehemiah, and there's so much more that we could say, but just mention a couple things real quickly here, and then leave this lesson with you. But there's just it's part of the reason I wanted to revisit this. Again, I had so many comments and so much feedback from that particular question last time, but also because the lessons yesterday had me encouraged, and it had me thinking. In fact, I can't remember, maybe one of the guys mentioned Nehemiah, and that's what had me thinking about Nehemiah so much. I've thought about Nehemiah a lot over the years as a great study of leadership, but it's also a great study to encourage us and to realize that whatever I might be dealing with, it's been dealt with, and probably has been dealt with in some form, at least in the book of Nehemiah. They faced mockery. When you get to chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, you have these fellas, Sanballat and Tobiah, and they mock. What do these feeble Jews, verse 2 says? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Oh, look at you, fellas. Are you gonna build this thing up in a day? You must really think you're something. Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? You guys, it's a pipe dream you got going here. People will try to mock us sometimes, discourage us. Then you have Tobiah. Even that which they build, in verse 3, he says, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Even a fox could knock that thing down. They face mockery. They also face conspiracy, which you see in verses 7 and 8 of that same chapter. You got Sanballat and Tobiah, the Arabians, Ammonites, Ashdodites. They hear that the walls are being made up, because verse 6 says the wall was joined together to the half thereof, because the people had a mind to work. They hear about it. Now they're starting to fill in the breaches. And their wrath, the end of verse 7 says, they conspired, all of them together, to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. They faced conspiracy. They also faced just general discouragement. You drop down to verse 10. Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed. There's much rubbish, so that we're not able to build the wall. They were just discouraged. And our adversaries said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them and slay them and cause the work to cease. Now the lies of the enemy, the threats of the enemy, are discouraging them to the point they're kind of going, well, you know what they're saying? Are you hearing what they're saying, Nehemiah? Maybe we just can't do this. So it goes on to say, when the Jews, it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, verse 12, they said unto us 10 times, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Again, people are getting discouraged, wanting to quit. So Nehemiah deals with that in the next few verses. When you get to chapter 5, they're going to face internal discord. Some of the people were poor, and they and their wives cry against their brethren. We, our sons and our daughters, are many. There were some that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, to pay their taxes, in other words, and that upon our land and vineyards. Some of them had to sell their children even into bondage. They're facing internal opposition. But let me tell you something. Not to downplay any of these, but you got mockery. Nobody likes to be mocked. There's conspiracy. There were threats, but they didn't make good on those threats. And maybe that's at least partially because Nehemiah, they end up, they're kind of working with a weapon in one hand and a trowel in the other. They face discouragement. Nobody likes discouragement. Nobody's immune from that. And they had those internal problems. But when you get to chapter 6, it's like a full court press from the devil to try to get them discouraged, to try to get them to stop. And the thing is, these are some of the same things, some of the same tactics that the devil uses today. And there really are 3 that stand out to me in this chapter. Verses 1 through 4, isolation. You see this in nature. The lioness that's hunting is going to go after that one that's away from the herd. Isolation. And so again, as we pointed out a while ago, surround yourself with faithful Christians, and especially some good, godly mentors. Because the devil, if he can isolate you, and discouragement's a great way to do that. Distraction is a great way to do that. If he can isolate you, you're a much easier target. And so you have these fellas that they want Nehemiah, come down to the valley, to the plain of Ono, and meet with us. They're lying. They want to do him harm. And as a fellow said, I've told y'all before, I believe, that I went to preacher school with, I can still see that brother sitting there shaking his finger, and he says, sometimes we have to say no to oh no. Isolation. The devil would love to get us isolated. And really, this happens over and over and over. 4 times after this sort. So at least 5 times here that they've tried to isolate Nehemiah. But there's also insinuation in verses 5 through 9. You see that? Verses 5 through 9, or verse 5 beginning rather. He says, Sanballat sent his servant with an open letter. And so they start to insinuate things. Oh, you're rebelling. Wait till the king hears about this. Insinuation. Nehemiah just calls them out. He says, you're saying things that just simply are not true. And to bring this down to today, I would encourage all of us, try to remember myself. We all deal with this kind of thing from time to time. The insinuation, the devil will use things like that to get us distracted, discouraged. But know the word well enough to recognize and ignore the lies of the enemy. And then finally, in verses 10 through 14, you see intimidation. This is another huge tactic of the devil to discourage us, to distract us. Intimidation. So there are these people that say to Nehemiah, we should meet together in the house of God. We'll shut the doors of the temple because Nehemiah, they're coming after you. They're going to try to kill you. And Nehemiah says, I perceive, verse 12, that God had not sent him, but he pronounced this prophecy against me, for Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. They paid him to say that because that's part of that isolation. But notice verse 13, therefore was he hired that I should be afraid and do so and sin. Have you ever thought about this? Why the statement of verse 13? That I will be afraid and do so and sin. Sin by going just simply to meet with them? Why would that be? I mean, who could blame him for that? And I think the answer is this. The answer is because he was needed. And he knew that he would be abandoning his post, so to speak. I think there's a lesson for us in that today. Yeah, we may get discouraged. And sometimes the insinuation of the enemy will distract us, discourage us. But don't let him isolate us. Don't let him get us to leave, abandon our post, because you and I, each individual, we're needed in the body of Christ. There's something you do that it's not that no one else could do any particular thing, but each one of us brings something unique to the table because we are unique people, individuals. And so discouragement, it happens, but we need to be aware of those, I think, three of the greatest tools of the devil: isolation, insinuation, and intimidation. And as Brother Grider would say, when the devil comes, when the world comes, starts trying to oppose us, to discourage us, to get us to quit serving God, to ignore God, or just simply to get us to fall away because of that discouragement, he says we can look them in the eye, so to speak, and say, you're going to have to take that up with my older brother. May we always put our faith, our trust in God and follow him. Are you doing that tonight? Are you a child of God? If there's somebody who's not a Christian, you need to be a part of the family of God. Make God your father, Christ your older brother. You'll be surrounded by a family of brothers and sisters. And you will have those who will seek to encourage you and help you to go to heaven when this life is over. Might be that you need to do that tonight. Might be that as a child of God, that you're discouraged. It may be that you're not where you need to be spiritually. The song of invitation is thy heart right with God? We close with that question. There's nothing more encouraging than knowing in your heart of hearts, I'm right with God, and I have a home in heaven when this life is over. If you don't have that, if we can help you with that in some way, come as we stand and sing to encourage you.